Don't do mass evangelism. Just focus on one family.
Yeah.
Or disciple people toward salvation. Maybe don't preach. Just help people discover God's word and obey it. Yeah, if hearing stuff like that makes you want to, like, jump up and argue, well, you're not alone.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
Or maybe it just makes you feel like, wow, I just wasted a whole week listening to something completely backward, you know?
Yeah, I can totally see that. And those ideas, they seem so counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
They're pulled straight from our source material for today's deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome, everyone. Our mission here is always to grab a stack of sources. Today, it's excerpts from this really interesting PDF called Jesus's Counterintuitive Disciple Making. And just, dig in, find the key insights.
Yeah, pull out the nuggets that matter. And for this one, we're looking at a really different way to spread a message. Methods the source calls counterintuitive, based on biblical examples.
But it's not just about the methods, is it? We're also digging into why these ideas cause such a strong reaction. In one particular case, the source highlights.
Exactly. It sets up this fascinating story of transformation, not just strategy, but a person.
Okay, let's dive in. Set the scene for us.
All right. So the source starts with this training event in Africa. It's about something called Disciple Making Movement Principles, or DM.
DM, okay. And that's about?
Basically, methods for helping disciples and churches multiply rapidly within communities, naturally.
Rapid multiplication.
Yeah.
Huh. You'd think that would involve mass evangelism, but you opened by saying the opposite.
Right, and that's the counterintuitive part. So at this training, there's a facilitator from the West, David Watson, and this key African leader named Thomas.
Okay, tell us about Thomas, his background.
Well, the PDF says he's highly educated, got his bachelor's, his master's, both in biblical theology, leads a big ministry team, lots of experience planting churches. So yeah, he knows his stuff.
Definitely not a newbie. He comes in with this wealth of experience. And his first impression of David, the facilitator?
Skeptical, very skeptical. The source says he saw David as, and I quote, just one more in a long line of Western evangelism experts. Maybe didn't get the local reality.
Which, that's a fair concern sometimes.
Absolutely.
Oh.
And Thomas quickly zooms in on the ideas that really clash with his training and experience, the ones you mentioned right at the start.
Yeah. Don't do mass evangelism. Focus on one family.
Disciple people towards salvation instead of, the other way around.
And don't preach or teach. Just help lost people discover and obey God's word.
Those three really got under his skin.
Wow. Yeah, those do sound pretty radical compared to a lot of standard approaches.
Yeah.
So Thomas wasn't just quietly disagreeing.
Oh, no. The source says he actively fought it, contested every single point David made.
Every point.
Every point. Resisted every answer. David would bring up Bible verses to back it up, and Thomas would find ways to kind of dismiss the interpretation or the conclusion.
So he's actively trying to undermine the training.
Yeah. By the middle of the week, he was actually telling other people there, hey, you should just ignore this stuff.
Man, that must have been incredibly tough for David. The source calls it a heavyweight fight near the end.
It does, and it makes a point of saying David Watson wasn't easily intimidated. He'd faced real danger before prison, even people trying to kill him.
Seriously?
Yeah, but the source says he found Thomas's resistance, his bulldog tenacity, uniquely draining. More difficult, in a way, than the physical threats.
Wow. That really says something about how intense this intellectual and spiritual conflict was. So how did David feel when it was all over?
Exhausted, discouraged. Felt like the whole week was a complete waste because of Thomas. He apparently vowed he'd never go back there.
Oof. So it ends in a really sour note. Defeat, frustration. But the story doesn't end there.
No, it takes a turn. And it's because of something small, something both of them kind of forgot about at first.
What was that?
A simple commitment sheet. Everyone signed one at the end.
What did it say? Something standard.
Pretty simple, actually. It was like, I commit to obey what I've learned this week from the Bible about making disciples and planting churches, and I'll share it with people I influence.
And Thomas signed that. After fighting it tooth and nail.
Well, the source hints maybe he just signed it in the moment, going through the motions. But here's the key thing the source stresses. Despite all his opposition, Thomas was still a man of high principles.
Okay, so his integrity mattered more than maybe his pride or his skepticism in that moment. What happened when he found the sheet again?
The PDF says he stumbled across it later, clearing his desk, and it just hit him. He felt this deep sense that he'd made a promise to God and he had to keep it.
Wow. Just a piece of paper, but it represented a commitment. That's powerful. So what did he do?
He acted, called his whole team together, and he shared the principles from the training, the very ones he'd been fighting against.
How did they react? Did he expect them to push back too?
Apparently, yeah, he did. But the source says, surprise, his team was actually receptive. They were encouraged by these new ideas.
Huh. Maybe they were less locked into the old ways? Or just ready for something different?
Seems like it. So Thomas then decides, okay, principles or not, let's test this.
Test the ideas he'd just spent a week arguing were wrong.
Exactly. He trained his team on the very principles he had once rejected. Then he sent them out into 3 different regions to try it out and report back.
Okay, the moment of truth. What happened? What were the results after, 3 months?
The source uses the word stunned. Apparently, the original training organizer sent an email asking how things were going, which prompted Thomas to actually call his teams and get an update.
Yeah.
The results were, well, dramatically different, completely blew their old methods out of the water.
How different are we talking?
In just those 3 months, using these weird methods, his teams had planted over 15 new churches.
15.
15, and seen 450 new believers come to faith.
Woo.
And the source points out, remember, using their traditional approach, it usually took them more than a year just to start one new church in those same areas.
Okay, that's staggering. 15 churches and 450 people in 3 months versus one church in over a year. No wonder the source says he went from militant skeptic to a proponent pretty fast.
Yeah, results like that tend to make you rethink things, don't they? So the story wraps up with another meeting about 6 months later.
And both Thomas and David are there this time. I can only imagine David seeing Thomas walk in.
The source says David felt dread, like, oh no, here we go again, round 2.
But that's not what happened.
Nope. Thomas came up to David basically with a please forgive me speech prepared.
Wow. Real humility there. Did he share updated numbers?
He did. He told David his teams had now planted 120 new churches.
120.
120. And Thomas admitted, I never dreamed this was possible.
Incredible. What a turnaround. From fighting every idea to asking forgiveness and reporting results beyond his wildest dreams. And the source says they became friends.
Good friends and colleagues, yeah. And the impact just kept growing. Thomas's teams went on to plant many hundreds of churches, not just in their country, but in neighboring ones too.
Amazing.
And get the source specifically mentions 150 of those churches were planted among 2 people groups that were considered 100% Muslim. Places where, according to the PDF, the gospel just hadn't been able to get any traction before.
That detail is really striking. Taking these ideas that seemed so backward and seeing them work so powerfully, especially in places considered really difficult.
Right. The source kind of reflects on it, saying Thomas's initial resistance is almost amusing in hindsight.
Yeah, easy to say now.
But it makes a really important point, doesn't it? How hard it is for any of us to really honestly evaluate how we're doing things, to measure our own efforts against, foundational principles, in this case, biblical ones.
It's a tough process. The source says challenging our own methods is hard for everyone, even if it's not usually that dramatic.
But it's necessary, right? If we want to be truly effective and make sure we're aligned with what actually works, or what we're supposed to be doing based on deeper principles.
And the source is clear. This isn't some brand new revolutionary thing David invented.
Not at all. It says this approach is hidden in plain sight in the Bible. Points right to the Gospels, the book of Acts. It's there.
And the training itself reflects that.
Yeah, the methodology uses only the Bible. It's not about lectures or giving people the answers. It's about groups discovering the principles themselves directly from the text, often using things like discovery Bible studies.
Okay, discovery Bible studies. Can you quickly explain what that is?
Sure. It's basically a simple method where a group reads a Bible passage together, asks some basic questions like, what does this say? What does it mean? And critically, how can we obey this? Or who can we share this with? It's about discovery and obedience.
Got it. Discovery and obedience together. So, if these principles are right there in the Bible, why does the source suggest they get overlooked so often?
Well, a couple of reasons are suggested. One is just simplicity. Maybe it seems too simple, not sophisticated enough.
Yeah, people like complex systems sometimes.
Right. And the other big reason is that it's genuinely counterintuitive compared to how a lot of traditional ministry has evolved, especially influenced by modern marketing and business ideas, mass communication models.
Ah, okay. So contrasting it with maybe focusing on slick presentations, big events, casting a wide net, getting that initial decision or conversion.
Exactly. Getting the conversion and then maybe hoping discipleship kind of happens later, often without a clear, easily reproducible plan for it.
Whereas this DMM approach seems to embed discipleship and obedience from day one.
Right from the start. And the source points out this huge irony. In many parts of the world, especially among Muslim communities, people are actually embracing faith in Jesus faster using these simple, obedience-focused, group-based methods than through more traditional, westernized church approaches.
Wow, that really makes you think. Okay, let's get into the specifics. The source listed 10 of these counterintuitive strategies. Can we walk through those?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's break down these 10 points. Number 1, go slow at first in order to go fast later.
Okay, that definitely sounds backward.
Yeah.
Go slow to go fast. How does that work?
The source uses the example of Jesus. He spent 3 years really focused, pouring into just 12 disciples. Seems slow, right?
Very slow compared to reaching crowds.
But then, look what happened. Within about 70 years, the movement spread like wildfire across the whole Roman world. The insight is that investing deeply in a few key people first builds a super strong foundation. It builds the capacity for really rapid exponential growth later.
Ah, okay. Deep roots allow for faster growth eventually. Makes sense. What's number 2?
Focus on a few to win many. This pushes back hard against the idea that success always means bigger numbers right now. Mass marketing thinking.
Yeah, the more eyeballs, the better approach.
Right. The source points out Jesus gave, it says, almost all of his attention to those 12, and especially his inner circle, Peter, James, John, Andrew. The idea is that depth with a small, committed group actually creates way more long-term, lasting impact than spreading yourself thin trying to reach everyone, which often leads to shallow results.
Okay, rethinking where the real leverage is.
Yeah.
Deeper, not necessarily wider initially. Third point.
Engage an entire family or group, not just the individual. This picks up on how things often happened in the New Testament, whole households believing. And discovery Bible studies, that method we mentioned, are often done with families or existing social groups.
Why is the group focus so important? What's the advantage?
Well, the insight is about support and resilience. When a whole family or a close-knit group decides together, they support each other in that decision. It makes it much harder for outside pressure to isolate one person and force them to give up.
Right. You avoid that situation where one person converts and is immediately cut off by their family and community.
Exactly. That's a massive barrier in many cultures, especially, say, in Muslim contexts where leaving Islam can have huge social consequences. The group provides built-in community and makes the change more sustainable.
That's really practical. Okay, number 4.
Share only when and where people are ready to hear. Now, this isn't about being lazy or passive. It's about being strategic, recognizing reality.
What reality is that?
Just that people have selective attention,
Yeah.
right? We filter things. We only really hear and remember stuff we're actually open to hearing at that moment.
True. So the insight here is,
Invest your time wisely. Focus on the people God seems to have already prepared, the ones who are searching or open. The source calls them people ready to bridge the gospel into their oikos, their network, their family, their community. If someone's clearly resistant or just not interested after you engage a bit, the strategy isn't to keep hammering away. It's to politely move on and look for someone else whose heart is ready.
focus on the receptive soil. Makes sense. Number 5.
Start with creation, not with Christ. This one, the source says, is particularly important, even crucial when sharing with Muslims, but the principle can apply more broadly too.
Why start way back in Genesis? Why not jump straight to Jesus?
Because the insight is you need the right foundation. Before people can really grasp concepts like sin or God's love or why Jesus' sacrifice was necessary, they need a basic understanding of who God is, the true character of the supreme God, as the source puts it, and a relationship to him, starting from the beginning.
Because other worldviews might have a very different starting point or view of God.
Exactly. The source notes that the Quran's depiction of God is significantly different from the Bible's. So you have to establish that biblical worldview first, build the framework before the story of Jesus makes sense in its proper context.
Lay the groundwork. Got it. Okay, number 6.
It's about discovering and obeying, not teaching and knowledge. This comes back to that discovery Bible study idea. The source uses Jesus' parables as an example. He didn't always spell everything out. He let people wrestle with it, figure out the implications themselves.
So it's less about just downloading information into people's heads.
Precisely. The core insight is that real-life change, real transformation, happens when people discover truth in God's word for themselves and then commit to obeying it. That process, group discovery, discussion, holding each other accountable to actually do it, takes time, sure, more time than a lecture. but it leads to much deeper results.
It connects knowing and doing.
Yes. The source talks about the folly of knowing God's will and ignoring it. It even brings up that kid's song about the wise man building his house on the rock.
Oh, yeah.
The point being, the rock isn't just hearing or knowing the words, it's doing them, obeying them. True discipleship, the PDF argues, boils down to making a daily choice to intentionally and consistently obey God's will.
Obedience is the engine of transformation, not just knowledge. That's a big one. Number 7.
Disciple people to conversion, not vice versa.
Okay, hold on. This one seems completely upside down compared to how most people think about it. Conversion first, then discipleship.
But that's the usual model, yeah. Get people to make a decision, say the prayer, then start teaching them how to live as a Christian. But the source argues Jesus often did it differently.
How so?
He called regular guys, fishermen, tax collectors. He walked with them, lived life with them. He revealed truth gradually. He asked them to start living by the values of his kingdom before they fully understood everything or made a final commitment. They started doing the things he did. They saw God's power work through them. And then, through that process, they came to the point of full conversion and commitment.
So the journey of learning and obeying actually led them to the point of conversion.
That's the idea. The insight is that growth in understanding and, crucially, practice often paves the way for the decision of faith. Conversion becomes the culmination of a journey, not just the starting pistol. And the source says this model is working really well, especially, again, with Muslims.
Like the discovery process naturally leads there. Wow. Okay, number 8.
Coach lost people from the beginning to discover and obey biblical truth. This tackles a common question. Can someone who isn't even a believer yet actually engage with the Bible, understand parts of it, and agree to obey it in a group?
And based on Thomas's story and the results, the answer seems to be
yes. They might be guided by a more experienced disciple maker, someone coaching them through the discovery process. But the key insight is, even before someone has fully committed to Christ, the act of obeying simple truths they discover in the Bible can lead to real, tangible life changes.
obedience itself starts changing them.
It seems so. And as they discover more, especially about who Jesus is and what he did, the source says it often leads to these moments where whole groups joyfully decide to follow him and get baptized together without needing a big formal invitation or altar call. The process itself leads to the outcome.
So obedience isn't just a result of faith. It can be a path to faith. That's fascinating. Number 9.
Prepare to spend a long time making strong disciples, but anticipate miraculous accelerations. This acknowledges reality. Genuine discipleship, becoming mature in faith, is a lifelong journey. It takes time.
Okay, patience is key. But the miraculous accelerations part sounds intriguing.
It is. The insight is, while you're committed for the long haul, be ready for God to show up in powerful, unexpected ways. Sometimes miracles happen even early on in these discovery Bible studies.
Like healings or something.
Could be, yeah. The source gives an example. Maybe you're studying Genesis, creation, and boom, a miracle happens that's clearly God's power. The group might immediately say, whoa, we need to jump to the New Testament now and learn about this Jesus who does miracles.
So you might have to adjust the plan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You might jump ahead, explain Jesus, then maybe circle back later to cover what you skipped. God is, as the source puts it, strategic but quite wonderfully unpredictable. You plan for the long term, but you stay open to these bursts of divine activity, these dramatic blessings that can accelerate everything.
Patience plus anticipation. Got it. And the last one, number 10.
Expect the hardest places to yield the greatest results.
Now this one is really interesting, especially thinking back to Thomas's results with those Muslim groups that had been totally unresponsive before.
Yeah, the source highlights this as a truly remarkable finding. Communities that seem the most hostile, the most dangerous, the most resistant to outsiders often end up seeing the fastest growth and multiplication when these DMM principles are used. Faster even than places where traditional churches already exist.
Why? What's the thinking behind that? Why would the hardest places be the most fruitful?
The source offers a couple of potential reasons. One is that the simple, low-key, culturally sensitive nature of these small home-based DMM groups doesn't trigger the same rejection as perhaps more visibly Western or institutional church structures might. It fits more naturally.
Less foreign baggage.
Right. The other idea is about the people themselves. For those who've only known a very strict, perhaps fundamentalist form of religion, the source suggests they might be incredibly open to the joy, freedom, forgiveness, and assurance they find in following Jesus. And when they do embrace it, they often do so with unimaginable courage and desire to share it, precisely because of the background they come from.
So the very hardness of the place might create a greater readiness for this specific kind of message and method.
That seems to be the insight. Places we might write off as impossible might actually be the most fertile ground for this particular counterintuitive approach.
Yeah, that's a powerful thought to end the list on. Truly challenges assumptions.
It really does. Turns a lot of conventional wisdom on its head.
Okay, so we've walked through Thomas's incredible journey from fierce skeptic to passionate advocate. We've looked at how these counterintuitive ideas challenge deeply ingrained ministry habits. And we've unpacked these 10 principles, focusing on things like going slow to go fast, depth over breadth initially, group engagement, discovery, and obedience over just teaching. How do we bring this back to you, our listener? Why should this matter to you, whatever your work or goals are?
Well, I think this whole deep dive really pushes us to look inward, doesn't it? To evaluate our own efforts. Are we maybe more focused on, I don't know, looking busy or impressive on the surface? Or are we truly aiming for deep, lasting, reproducible change that comes from actually living out core principles?
Yeah, what does it mean for us to prioritize obedience, actually doing the stuff over just knowing more stuff? Whether that's in our work, our families, our personal growth.
It forces us to ask, are we just following the standard playbook in our field? Are we doing things because that's how it's always done, based on maybe mass market thinking or just cultural inertia? Or are we willing to consider simpler, maybe less flashy, maybe counterintuitive approaches that might actually be more effective, more aligned with first principles?
It definitely highlights the potential power in maybe investing deeply in a few key relationships or projects. The strength that comes from working with existing groups or communities rather than just targeting individuals, and that need for patience, but also being ready for those unexpected breakthroughs.
Exactly. It's a different way of thinking about impact.
We started this deep dive talking about ideas that sounded frankly, kind of nonsensical at first, a strategy that felt completely confounding to an experienced leader like Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
And we followed his story through that intense resistance and that surprising commitment driven by principle, the absolutely stunning results, and finally this incredible transformation and multiplication, even in places everyone thought were impossible to reach.
Yeah, it's a powerful illustration, isn't it, of what can happen when we get back to simple foundational principles in this context, biblical ones, and really zero in on that cycle of discovery and consistent obedience, especially doing it together in community.
So here's maybe the final thought for you to chew on, building on what we've explored today. If this kind of radical transformation described in the source can happen even in the hardest places, just by focusing on simple discovery and obedience within communities, what fundamental assumptions might you need to challenge in your own life, your own work, wherever you are? What might we all be overlooking because it seems too simple, maybe too slow, or just too counterintuitive?